Hello and welcome to Vision Denial. My name is Sam, and if you're new here, I have watched every single playoff game in 2022. Yes, all of them, including that one. For all the regions. And I've dedicated the show to a review of every single day of Worlds, but this is not a day of Worlds. This is me doing a preview of an upcoming matchup with T1 versus Royal Never Give Up. I'm going to be right up front. If you wanted to just know what I think, it's probably going to be T1, but T1 3-2. This is a much closer matchup than some of the other ones that are in the lineup at this given point. And personally, I think it's more due to a stylistic choice than anything else. But this is going to be mostly things. I'm using a lot of statistics that I've gathered from different sources. I'm putting a link down below of the whole set of statistics that I use usually for my notes in these videos in the description down below. Without further ado, let's take a breakdown of each of the particular role matchups and my overthoughts of how each team is going to win. First matchup, we've got Oner versus Breathe in the top side of the map. Personally here, this is a fairly close matchup between the two. I think there's an edge case here where looking at the damage per minute from Oner, you would think that there's a larger emphasis in terms of the his ability to carry games versus how Breathe does it. But T1 has a larger emphasis on early game approaches and really pushing the envelope early game, which means they group up faster more often than not. While as with RNG, they're a much slower team overall, like significantly slower between the two, and so there's a lot bigger emphasis in terms of side lane control within the mid game. Less so in the late game where they fumble a little bit, but they've been more consistent with such during this tournament. And so late game, there's a lot bigger emphasis in terms of side lane control. And with both of their particular champion pools having a huge overlap, Oner having played more champions though, but they're all unique. The champion pool still overlaps, as both of them have played Jax, Fiora's side lane control primarily. And really going down the line, this is not where I think the matchup of the game or where I think the game will be decided. Zeus has a larger kill participation overall, but the kill share between the two, nearly the same. Gold share between the two, literally a percentage difference between each other. CS per minute, virtually the same. KDA, virtually the same. Damage per minute is literally the only thing between the two that differentiates themselves, and it's primarily from a stylistic matchup of the teams, first and foremost, more than the actual abilities for either of the two to carry. Our next matchup in the jungle, we've got Oner versus Wei. And to preface anything, Wei, I think, is a much stronger jungler between the two. He's got a higher kill participation, kill share, KDA overall, damage per minute. He is by far a much deadlier jungler. He's a much more teamfight-oriented jungler. He puts in a lot of pressure early game and late game for anything that is necessary. The interesting thing between the two is that their gold per minute stays the same. The Oner does not fall behind. Having a lower damage per minute or of the sort and having a worse KDA, but not falling behind in gold is impressive. He farms a lot. And I think that is indicative also of the faster games that T1 has. They have a lot better closing outs of games than most of the other teams at Worlds currently. And I think that's probably indicative of the fact that he enables a lot of his laners really early in, and they take the brunt of a lot of the needs for their team. While as Wade takes into account that he probably has to carry a situation or really establish dominance to be a secondary carry for the team. And so it's going to be interesting as the matchup between the two is one of like assistance towards the team versus really carrying the team overall. Now, this is the matchup people are looking forward to. We've got the Demon King Faker versus the King of Spring Xiaohu. Let's not lie here, right? Faker's not been known primarily for being the king of statistics over the years, not since his like 2015 play. And honestly, by all means, that's primarily because he's looking for plays so often. He's really pushing the envelope of everything. So his KDA is much lower. He dies more frequently. His gold per minute is going to be lower than Xiaohu's. His kill share, his kill participation, almost everything across the board here, except damage per minute. That is something to me that I found really interesting. Faker's damage per minute matching Xiaohu's, despite the fact that all across his board it is just categorically lower. He takes less gold, but deals almost as much damage as Xiaohu. That's wild to me. And so it's going to be really interesting to see that if the consistency of the King of Spring comes through and is able to contain what is the playmaker. It's Faker. Now, I'm not going to lie here. It's going to be very clear that during the laning phase, Xiaohu is going to win the entire time. There is an actual weakness within Faker's laning phase, and that's to be expected. But it's whether or not T1 is able to translate any of their other plays around the map towards the mid game, or even preferably within the early game to really snowball, to see if Faker can actually get the space that he needs to do what he likes to do. As many will be looking into the mid lane for a matchup here, I'm looking primarily, this is the defining matchup between these two teams. Gumayusi versus GALA. It is super interesting to me the way that this matchup is going to go. Gumayusi categorically has a stronger KDA, stronger gold per minute, stronger CS per minute, higher kill participation, higher kill share than GALA. His statistics across the board are ludicrous comparatively. But GALA outshines him in damage per minute. This is for me where I think a lot of the times it is cool to see where resources are put into teams, and it's clear that GALA does more with less. And as their champion pools overlap quite a bit, I'll be really interested to see how they actually draft accordingly regarding the situation, and how both of these players will match up in terms of the laning phase, team fighting in mid game, team fighting in late game, because they are both monsters into their roles. This, I think, is why there is such a close margin between the two. Regardless of how any of the other roles go with anything, either of these two pop off, that's the game. And this could go either way, in my opinion. The final matchup between the two, we've got Keria versus Ming. And I'm surprised between the two, as Keria hasn't played as many champions as I thought he would. I really thought he would play a unique champion almost every game. That said, the really interesting factor to me here mostly lies in the fact that Ming does a lot to enable his team in terms of setting up team fights, while Keria has done a lot to enable Gumayusi. Keria also has such a stronger KDA and a stronger kill participation. He's much more involved with his team overall, whereas Ming tends to be a lot more involved into the bot lane. And by all accounts and purposes here, it's totally fine between the two. They have a very similar vision score, like for the teams themselves. I think the Royals have a slightly stronger vision denial overall, but like slightly stronger. And I think that's primarily from the emphasis of the fact that they usually, as a team, take a lot of time to establish the kind of control they need. That said, the amount of control that both of these players establish with vision and taking the time for their team to be properly set up should be emphasized that Keria is on the map for a much longer period of time than Ming is. He dies significantly less. He applies pressure significantly more. He roams a lot more. And while I don't think that either of these two edge out significantly harder than the other, the fact that Keria is a much more team-oriented player and has done a lot more to enable his players, especially enabling Gumayusi, means that I'm going to be still looking towards the bot lane, but I'm also going to be looking as to how well can Ming either respond or be proactive against him. My final look into things, when I'm looking into the matchups themselves, I look at the player matchups in terms of their entire time at Worlds, just to get a look at how their laning goes. And that might skew a couple of different things, but I think it's important to tell because some of the other, even the emerging region teams, do challenge the individual laners in one way, shape, or form, and it's not going to be universal across. Worlds is always going to have some interesting skewed data. When looking, however, in terms of the team-per-team matchup, I have separated the play-ins version of the Royals versus the group version of the Royals. And the first thing that comes to mind here is that the play-ins version of the Royals looks a lot more competitive towards T1 than their group versions. For one, play-ins version has a significantly longer playtime by like quite a margin compared to their group counterpart. But I don't think that's what's necessarily interesting here. Their damage per minute, their gold differential per minute, their gold differential at 15 minutes, a lot of the different things, their first tower percentage is exactly the same as T1 if you're looking at the play-in stats alone. They're actually better in terms of first blood, in terms of everything else. And then you move to groups where they are categorically worse in performance. And so it's hard for me to tell because we've seen what it looks like for the Royals to really dominate a matchup. And this isn't to say because like we've seen what it looks like when they play against DRX. They were losing. They should have lost that game. This was primarily an issue from them, from DRX specifically. And so it's not like these stats are coming out of nowhere of like, oh yeah, every other team was super bad. No. They moved to groups and were challenged primarily on their playstyle a lot harder, and you can tell that they were challenged a lot harder. And from that, I can't see myself really counting them out completely because their groups version, when it comes to neutral objectives or turret plates, is almost still identical to their play-ins version. They don't shy away from the fact that they still really went for as many heralds per game, actually better herald control overall. They've got a better dragon at 15 minutes, more dragons per, or not more dragons, but around the same kind of average dragons per game. And so for me, looking at the different two and just seeing that RNG plays worse in groups, but they play worse in a specific margin of the amount of gold they're able to sustain and how well they fight, not how well they still control neutral objectives and their early game approach. I just get worried because T1 is also equally similarly an early game team, especially with neutral approaches. The difference here is that they hold less control. I really am going to be curious because the defining factor for T1 is that they accumulate gold from plates, and oh my god, do they collect a frick ton of plates. 7.17 plates per game on average versus the 4.57 of RNG. So this is going to be a game defined by the early game. If T1 establishes control early game, I don't think RNG has much of a chance. If RNG at any point survives that and is establishing control in the mid game, it's their game. But those are my thoughts. I want to hear what you guys have to think in the comments down below. Do you think it's going to be a wash? Because to me, I think this is going to be 3-2. I think this is going to go back and forth. Any of your thoughts I would love to hear in the comments down below. If you like this kind of content, leave a like and subscribe. All the good stuff. And I've got other videos regarding all of the other days that I've reviewed for Worlds, as well as all of the teams that have participated. Thank you very much for watching. Wish you have a great time. We'll see you next time on the next breakdown.